So, Dave, welcome back to A Reason for Hope.
Here we are.
Focusing on the creed. This has been really good, really enlightening and enjoyable to dive deep into what the creed actually means when we proclaim it on Sundays. It's kind of cool.
I'm enjoying myself. I hope people are getting something out of it.
It's good. So at the last time, we've been speaking about that we believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And we kind of covered what we mean when we say the word God, God as the creator. But what about when we say God as the Father, right? Why not Mother? And I'm sure it annoys some people that we allude to God or call God our Father.
Right.
And there's a rub there to a lot of people, especially today.
Right.
So what your thoughts? What you say?
Well, my first response would be simply, we get that from Jesus. It's Jesus that reveals that God is our Father. Nowhere in divine revelation is God called a mother. There are some times in divine revelation you may find a motherly image of God in the sense that some kind of motherly qualities are given to him. But nowhere is he referred to as mother, only as Father. And Jesus is the one who particularly reveals this to us. So you can't go against this.
Can't argue with Jesus.
Because if Jesus is the Son and he is God incarnate, and he said that God is our Father who art in heaven, and it's all because Jesus reveals that God is our Father that we say at the Mass, we dare to call God our Father, then I think you just have to accept that as part of divine revelation.
So is that the apologetic approach? Is like if someone were to rebuke that, you'd say, well, look, Jesus said it.
It's almost like good enough for Jesus is good enough for me. That's right.
He is God. So if he says he's the Father, he's the Father.
And I would also ask where in divine revelation that is that God could be a mother. And they wouldn't be able to find it. Like I said, they may find a feminine image or a motherly image of God here and there. But there's a difference between drawing an analogy between God and fatherhood and using like a metaphor, like, for example, Jesus says he longs to gather the inhabitants of Jerusalem as a mother hen gathers her chicks. Well, Jesus is clearly male, but he's referring to a feminine or motherly image of a hen and chicks about how he'd like to respond to them in Jerusalem. Or if God says, even if a mother were to forget her baby, I will not forget you. That again is using the metaphor of this bond between a mother and her child, the closest bond that you could imagine on earth, as saying, well, even if a mother were to forget her child, God won't forget you. Those are metaphors using motherly images, but they're not calling God mother.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
But you will see God called Father. I don't know. I think people get bent out of shape though about
they do.
it.
Well, people get bent out of shape for a lot of things, today.
Sometimes you'll hear them say something like this, that maybe Jesus was just doing what he needed to do because of the culture he lived in. It was a culture that women didn't have much say. It had a very male-dominant religion. The culture itself was male-dominant. So, of course, God who governs is male. So isn't Jesus just going along with what the culture was saying? I would argue no, and that's a bad argument for a few reasons. Number one, Father is actually something kind of new. Not that there was no idea of God's fatherhood in Israel, but the way Jesus talks about God being our Father is revolutionary. So why did he only take a little step of revolutionary? Why would he go for the gusto? What he was telling us was something true about who God is, that he is Father. I think another reason is because then you have the truth that Jesus is talking not really be truth, but somehow being, culturally or socially conditioned or constructed. And that's a problem. Jesus being God is not going to give in to a social construction, or unless that social construction is true. He's not going to give into a sort of cultural conditioning unless that cultural conditioning is true to make a statement about the Father. Effectively, especially if it's an injustice to confine God to fatherhood and to somehow exclude motherhood, then you have Jesus doing something that's unjust in order to accomplish a goal, which is utilitarian, and Jesus would never do. So, I mean, the arguments for that approach to why God is Father and how we should be beyond those words now, because our culture is not what their culture was, are really poor. But God is a father in relation to creation. So we can talk about why, maybe.
Well, let me interject a little bit. So I'll be the devil's advocate. So if God is limitless, right, and we're kind of confining him to the idea of father, isn't that kind of counterintuitive,
Great point. A great point. I think that actually, though, we have to think of God's fatherhood differently than we might originally. So looking at God in himself, obviously God is infinite, eternal. In God is the perfection of every perfection. And that would include every perfection of fatherhood and of motherhood. So you're right. On some level, to say about God that God is father and not mother, if we mean it in himself, it seems like we're excluding something from God, and God is limitless and would have every perfection. So how can we do that? And I would say you're absolutely right. So God in himself is clearly beyond motherhood and fatherhood, would have all the perfections of motherhood and fatherhood in himself, and then some, you know. However, God in his relationship with the world is Father. So while in himself, in his nature, God is beyond motherhood and fatherhood, God is a father in relation to his creation. And there's some reasons I think that we could talk about that would draw out why that's the case.
Besides Jesus revealing to us that, God is our Father, what is the rationale about that?
Okay, so I think that the first thing we have to do is think about what fathers are, particularly in relation to their creation, their children. So the first thing is that fathers create outside of themselves, not inside themselves. So if you think about like human procreation, the man inseminates and the woman receives the man, and then the child grows within her. So in this sense, the man is distinct and separate from his creation and creates outside of himself, not within himself. Mm-hmm. Life doesn't pour forth from within him. Okay. It goes forth from him. This is how God is with regards to his creation. God doesn't create within himself. We're not within God. God creates ex nihilo, outside of himself, and stands apart and separate and distinct from his creation. It's also why, by the way, traditionally in the development of human cultures, certain words are feminine and other ones masculine. For example, in Latin, terra, which means the earth or land, is a feminine noun. Why? Because the earth receives the seed and then life grows up and springs forth from inside the earth. This is why the earth is sometimes referred to, sometimes we hear people say Mother Nature, right? Or the earth is our mother. It's a feminine image. Why? Because things sprout forth from the earth, but the seed is received into the earth.
Right.
So the whole notion of somehow how our language developed reflects this distinction between the masculine and the feminine, fatherhood and motherhood.
Right.
Well, we can understand why God is our Father if we think about how God creates and stands in relation to his creation. in another vein, but similar, God's transcendence with regards to his creation is infinite. But his immanence, that is being within creation, is not infinite. If God's immanence regarding creation was infinite, everything would be God. That would actually be pantheism. We don't believe that everything is God. Everything is distinct and separate from God. But as far as his transcendence to the world, that's an infinite transcendence. So another way in which God is Father is in the fact that his transcendence is infinite, but his immanence is not. And so these are some ways to kind of reason through
dumb that down a
fatherhood.
little bit. Just
Okay.
Yeah, just so.
Sure. So transcendence means over, above, different,
Mhm.
right? And immanence means within and part of, and emphasizes a sort of oneness. Okay. So we don't believe that God is one with his creation.
Gotcha.
In the
Okay.
sense that his
Yeah.
creation is him and he is his creation.
Sure.
God can dwell within creation, right? The human soul, we receive
Sure.
God within our soul, sanctifying grace. But I'm not God just because God's grace is in me,
Right.
or God is present in me as his temple, right?
Yeah.
The temple itself is not God. It's the place where God dwells.
Right.
But with regards to God's distinctness and separation from the world, God is infinite. He's beyond and above and infinitely transcends anything in his creation. So in that way, also too, the mother is actually one with her child,
Right.
because that child, though distinct from her, is within her in a way.
Yeah.
And the father remains separate and distinct from
Yeah.
and transcendent, therefore,
Yeah.
in regards to
That's
the
good.
child.
That's good. Great. Thanks for
I don't know if that helps.
clarifying that. Oh, it helps a lot.
And by the way, like any analogy, this analogy even falls apart if you push it too far,
Mm-hmm.
because clearly the child is distinct
That's
from
right.
the mother, and they're not the same being.
Yeah.
But you get the point.
You get the picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
You understand the differences now. So this is good. So when we say, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, we've got a deeper understanding, at least the beginning part of the creed, which is really awesome. Can't wait to dive even
Article
deeper.
1, check.
Check. Great. Until next time.
All right.
All right.